thinking about your career as a designer.
Right.
Like if you're going to go in, you're going to design a room. You're not going to design a room and just put a couch in it. You're going to design all of the other components in there to make it a really beautiful space.
Absolutely.
Your career is no different than that. So even though your manager might be the couch, you need those other pieces of furniture, those other people who are going to contribute to your career being the beautiful career that you want it to be.
This is James Rosseau, a.k.a. Trig, and let me welcome you to the Core Solutions Show. What's one thing you can share that even those closest to you, think about your best friends, that they do not know?
Oh, I'm an open book, so that's really...
Right, that's harder.
That is hard. I'm trying to think of something.
I want you to visualize one of your best friends, and you think to yourself, when I say this, she's going to say, what?
That's going to be really hard, too, because most of the things she's involved in.
Okay, gotcha.
But I would say, so I am what is called a blurred, a black nerd. It's an entire culture. It's a whole thing. My husband and I cosplay, like we do the whole thing. We dress up and all that kind of stuff, and we do different things. It started with just being like this obsession with like DC and Marvel.
Nice.
But what she may not know, and what a lot of people know, is that I have really gotten into anime thanks to my sons. And the anime, look, I didn't even understand this anime world, and like now that I'm in it, I was like, how recent
is this?
Probably about the last. Actually, no. You want to know? It's what is this? 2025. I can't believe I'm about to say this, but actually, really deeply into it during the pandemic because I ran out of stuff to watch. So I got into two things: Star Wars, and watched every single thing that has to do with Star Wars, the animated, the movies, whatever. Like I am a Star Wars aficionado before, and she probably doesn't know that either, but I am that. But also anime. I got deep into it.
So are you, and you said cosplay too?
And I cosplay. Yes, I cosplay. Before it was just because I'm very obsessed with like all things Batman and DC, and then I got into Marvel. But now I'm fully I can show up to an anime con as well and hold my own.
Look at that. Do you think this would be surprising to your clients?
Yes.
Yeah.
It will. Some of them know that I was like really obsessed with Batman, but the fact that I actually go out and cosplay, yeah, they'll be like, okay, well, that's another layer. So
here's the funny thing about superheroes. I love superheroes. And okay, so Batman's your favorite superhero?
Yes.
Okay, but if you could put your bias to the side for a moment, who do you think is the best superhero?
I'm gonna go with Iron Man. I have a thing for, that they're human, that it's intellect, that it's, like I have a thing for that. So Tony Stark, I'm not even going to say Iron Man. I'm going to go with Tony
Stark's. Yeah.
Because there's just something really cool about like just making yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Relevant.
That's hard to argue with because I have the same thing. I tend to lean on those who are human. Now, my favorite is Green Lantern, but if you ask me who's the best, just something about the ring and being able to do all those different things. I just always love that.
Okay.
But the human thing and not necessarily having like superhuman power, but creating things, right?
Yeah.
Now both of them did have a nice crutch of money.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I mean, unlimited money.
Right.
Okay. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I often think that this is going to be kind of controversial, but I think one of Will Smith's underrated movies was Hancock.
Oh, that was a good movie. It's a great movie.
And just the premise of that, of what that was, I thought was really interesting, as well as even the way that they showed up in society and all throughout history and time.
That was a great movie.
I thought it was really well done.
Great movie.
So I thought that was good. I wish there would have been like more of that because then I really could have gotten, very invested into that.
Well, something about the drunk superhero thing didn't go over,
that's what I said. Because that's what I was going to say. No money, just like broke superhero. Like I want to see that.
Something about the drunk superhero, and then. To me, one of my favorite parts of the movie was when he found his former wife, right? And they had that whole part, but a lot of people didn't like that. I don't know why. But
I was okay with that because of what was underneath that. That it wasn't like it was just a form. It wasn't like the baby mama or something. Like it wasn't like a form like that. Like it was literally like they were
a couple. They were married at one point.
Right. But because of like of almost destiny,
Right.
and or destiny and like this predestined existence. So I didn't mind that piece.
I liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was good.
I like that. I think
thought it was good.
I might have to take that in this weekend. I'm glad you
Yeah, I
mentioned
thought
that.
it was good. But see, this is why I got into anime.
Right.
Not we're gonna move past the subject, but I got into anime. If you're not into anime, I just think that the writing is just really brilliant, and that's what pulls you into anime. You have to kind of like start with the manga and really like get into the stories, but then
Right.
once you see them animated, then you're like, okay, wait, this is actually really just brilliantly written, and I think that there's something to be said for Japanese writing that we don't have.
You know what? And now you're going to make me say something that my wife is going to really like. And part of me does not want to admit this, but I'm going to have to admit it.
I hope she's listening.
She's listening, or she'll listen later. Probably about, good grief, I want to say 15 years ago, she started watching K-drama, Korean dramas and whatnot,
I'm
right?
there with her.
And for me, it was just hard for me to understand how you're watching something and having to read all these subtitles. Now today, fast forward, she understands a lot more of the language, so on and so forth. But that's predominantly what she watches. And at one point along that 15-year journey, why? And it was exactly what you said. The writing's better. They emote more. The acting seems more real in many cases. And not to overgeneralize, but pound for pound, it seemed better, right? And I had a hard time. So of course, what happens over time is I start sitting and watching some, particularly movies, and getting used to reading the titles. And I would have to say, pound for pound, skimming through Amazon, skimming through Netflix and whatnot, a lot of those movies are better.
They are. They like K-drama and just everything, and just like in the last 10 years, they have really beefed it up. To see something like Parasite win the highest award, I was like, they're finally getting recognition because the writing is outstanding.
It was really good.
And it's not, I think we get restricted kind of just in our Hollywood persona because we like to see, the same actors do their thing and everything like that. And sometimes I think that is at the detriment of the writing itself.
Even some of the game shows. I had some of the variety shows. I mean, just.
Oh, well, you know that because the evidence is that there will be an American version of it.
Correct. Like I didn't realize that till my wife started highlighting some of those too. And of course, the one that became really popular on Netflix, the game show where people had to die, of course.
The Squid Games.
Squid Games, right? I mean, that just shot through the roof. I mean,
yeah, that's next level. Like but if you're into that, then it's really. But again, you take away the dying, the killing, and everything like that. It's the storytelling. The storytelling that is really, really, really great. Which I'm glad we got on storytelling because I think that's how I kind of move through life. But storytelling connects
absolutely.
people.
So let's talk about that. So because your story is you, in my estimation, could have probably stayed in the corporate world and been crazy successful. You'd have been a CHRO at a Fortune 100 or Fortune 50 if you wanted to, but you decided to stop and develop Leader Keys Consulting.
Yes.
So let's take that as the first pit stop. What made you make that pivot and come out of the corporate space and all the things it had to offer to develop Leader Keys Consulting?
All right, I'm going to give you the short answer, and I'm also going to give you the long answer. So the short answer was COVID. And the long answer was I was one of those that was like immediately put on furlough when everything shut down. I'll never forget that day. It was I think it was March 11th, and it was March 11th because it was my son's birthday. So and that was the day that everybody was 1:00, and they were like, "Okay, everybody go home. We're not going to be in here anymore."
Right.
But what it did is 3 months later, they called me back, and I had 3 months to not be there. I had a lot of thinking that I did. I had a lot of soul searching that I did. And I had a lot of thought about whether or not this was the way I wanted to continue my career and not to date myself, but sunset it. Right.
Yeah.
And the answer was no. Now, the thing about it is that I had no plan on like what I was like, no. And
so they called you, Latrice, time to come back, ready to have you back in the office.
Yes.
And how long did it take you to say no?
It was like immediate. Like it was so immediate because I could tell you, I don't remember the actual conversation. I do remember because it was on Zoom.
So you didn't take a couple days to think about it?
No, I didn't. I just I mean, in fairness, I think the day before they were like, "Hey, we want to put a meeting on your calendar," and I knew what
You
it
knew
was.
what it was,
Right? It was
right.
either we're letting you go
Right.
or we want you
Once you
back.
come back.
Right? And I
Right.
knew it. We want you to come back because I was the only virtual trainee that was working in the organization and the only person who actually knew how to work remote. But that's a whole nother topic. So I knew I was going to come back at some point because they were going to realize maybe we should get the person who has been doing this for years
Right.
to help us with doing this. But it was that moment. I just remember the person's face. I don't remember words. And I was like, nah, I'm good. And she was like, think about it. And I was like, okay. And I hung up and then I wrote my resignation.
Gotcha. So then you don't know where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
But you let go of your source of income and your job and all the things again that come with that. How does Leader Keys Consulting get started?
So I had thought for a lot of years, dealing with vendors that provided learning solutions for the different companies that I worked for, having managed those vendors, managed the relationships, look at what they do and everything. I used to say, I need to be on that side of it. So I had in my head that this is something that I can do. And I don't think it's anything that would be different than what I'm actually going and doing for somebody else, work inside of an organization. So it took me about maybe 2 weeks when I said, okay, well, I've been thinking about this anyway. Maybe I should pivot. But
Had you operated your own business before ever?
I did like during one of my hiatuses from, I'm gonna it was maybe like I think 10 years before.
So you knew enough to be dangerous, but you
did.
didn't know in totality what it would
Exactly.
take. Okay.
I didn't.
Okay.
So the very first thing I did is I actually went back to some of those vendors, those different consultants and things like that. And I just went through like this interview process. What did you do? How did you get there? Like, what do I need to know? What do I need to
They know you were
avoid?
doing recon in order to start your own business?
Yes, because I was very transparent.
Good.
I was very transparent.
So key there to me says then you were also really good at building strong relationships such that you could leverage them after you left your official post.
Let me tell you about that because yes, I did. And I had so many people pour into me and was like, you absolutely can do this. And I even had one who was like, you're not doing anything you don't already do. You're just now going to do it for yourself and for more people.
Yeah.
Because now people inside of an organization, they know who you are and what you do and all of, but you get to do this for anybody now. So like spread your wings. But I'll tell you this, that for the first year of Leader Keys, I would say about 75% of my business came strictly from my relationships and referrals.
Right.
That was it.
But isn't that normal?
I don't know if that's normal. I want to say
A high percentage is normal.
I want to say that it is, but you'll be surprised at how many people don't know how to build strong relationships.
Okay, but it should be normal.
It should.
And there was a time it was expected to be normal.
Absolutely.
Let me say it that way. And I'm dating myself, but if you were doing sales or doing anything, the idea was you were a relationship builder.
Oh, I agree.
And you agreed and you focused on relationship equity. And when you went from place to place, the first people you recall is what we would call your warm market, people you have relationships with, right? I think if you start from a place of no warm market, you should examine how you are managing your business and relationships.
And see, but this is what happens. I mean, the statistics show that like to succeed in your own business, most businesses fail within the first 2 years.
Correct.
Consulting businesses fail within the first year.
I didn't know that. First year. Okay.
Yes. And it's this reason. I truly believe it's for this reason. It used to be that managing vendors and building relationships and things. And in my space, that is a very important thing. One of the biggest relationships I managed and cultivated was actually with LinkedIn. To the extent that LinkedIn will actually have me come there and share with them like things that I did to get them into the organization that I work for. Like I had like a 70% adoption rate of LinkedIn Learning when I brought it into my last organization.
Wow.
And they were like, how did you do that? And so but then I stayed in touch and I kept those relationships. But the thing is now is people don't feel like they have to keep the relationships.
Why is that, you think?
Because they come and go. I think it's just the immediacy of the things that it's just everything is very transient. I mean, it's like when you tell somebody you're at a job for 5 years, they're like, oh, you're an old timer. And it's like, no, we grew up where you worked for 30, 40, 50 years for the same company.
If you could, if your pay increases are outpacing the market, if you're being treated right, if you got a benefits package, if you feel like you're part of the culture,
you stay, right? And it did feel like family and work was a second community and things like that. I think that's where we're like even in an overall society, the ideal of community and family amongst like just the people you live around is almost a lost art. And so no, I don't think it's as common that relationship building is just an organic thing that happens. And I think for a lot of people, it also depends on the nature of their role, on whether or not they have the opportunity to build the relationships. They may be third, fourth, fifth, right, and not have like that direct connection. So I see a lot of that happen as well too. But this leads to why I actually call my organization Leader Keys, because the biggest thing when I got done is they found out how many people love to gatekeep and how many people like to provide keys and open up gates. So the name directly came from that. Oh, the amount of gatekeeping. Oh, well, I don't even have to tell you about corporate gatekeeping. So the moment I knew that corporate was not going to be my end game, I was in the office of our CHRO at the time, our Chief Human Resources Officer. And at the time, I was redesigning the Corporate Leadership Council for the employee resource groups. So all of those leaders were going to report into me. I was redesigning, and what I was doing was looking for new leaders. They had some leaders that had been in roles for 3, 4, 5 years. And we went through all the groups, and we got to the African American and Caribbean group. And I had a list of potential people to tap into. And so I sat there with her, and I started reading off the names. And she goes, no, they're not a high potential. And I read off another one. They're not a high potential. And I read off another one. Same answer. I just kept going down the list, and I was almost through with the list. And I stopped and I said, am I going to read anybody on this list that you're going to say is on the high potential list? And she goes, probably not. And then I shot my shot. I said, so if I wasn't in this role and I was on this list, would I be a potential? And she said, nope. That one word answer, nope, told me everything that I needed to know. And that's the thing about managing your career in a corporate space. There's a piece you absolutely own. But if you don't know how that other end works, what list you are on and what you're not on, like what opportunities you are going to be put in front of and you're not going to be put in front of, what you're told and what you are and not told. You don't know those things, then you give up a lot of control. And that's a lot of the gatekeeping that happens in corporate America.
There's so much we could unpack in
so
that.
Much.
Oh my gosh. Where do we start? So one, I like to throughout sprinkle for people, for people who are taking notes, mental notes, written notes, digital notes, whatever, to make sure they take away some things, right? So the first thing I would say is, and that story you told, for example, is that happens over and over and over. I can't tell you how many calibration sessions I've been in, right, where we're going through 300 people, and the exercise is, for example, put people up on the wall, right, and you watch your peers go up and put the sticky notes to the left in all these different areas, right?
The 9 box.
The 9 box, right? And then you're supposed to, if you have a challenge to them, challenge them, right? So people you have on your high performance thing, people come and make a little note on it and say, well, I want to challenge that, this, that, and that. And so what I would say to people is, don't allow yourself to be solely subject to the system. Ask where you are on the 9 box.
Absolutely.
Where am I on the performance and the potential scale? Where do I sit? It may be okay that you sit in the middle box 5, right? That you or 6 rather, where you're high performance, medium potential, but you should understand why.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You should understand why and have the conversation. And so many people never have the conversation.
Well, most people don't know that those conversations happen.
Right.
The average person, unless you're a part or have been a part of those calibration conversations, the average person do not know that those types of activities even happen.
Right.
This may be news.
True.
There are people listening to this right now that was like, Calla, what? Like they've never even heard.
So let's break it down for a second. So just let's just break down the cycle. The annual cycle, and you please jump in and correct me if I'm going astray. The annual cycle in most companies is pretty much the same. Okay, you've got goal setting at the top of the year.
Right.
You're going to have mid-year performance reviews
Right.
and recalibration. You're going to have in-year performance reviews, but in between the mid-year and the end-year, the budget process is happening. The CFO demands to know how much we're going to pay out. We had a number we said we'll pay out for bonuses and increases, but what's the real number? And you harden that number by having what's called calibration sessions, where people come in a room, all the executives and whatnot, and it's top down. So if your CEO wants to know that you guys have done it bottoms up, and in that room, managers are presenting your performance, your potential, and your bonus and compensation number expectations. And other managers typically get to challenge that.
Yes.
So if your manager is on a team that reports...
Or support it,
right? Exactly. So if your manager's on a team with 4 other people and they all report to the same leader, those 5 people come together and talk this through. And let's just, for sake of argument, say that their boss has in total $100,000 to spend. There will not be 100,000 and 5,000. 105,000.
5 ways,
it will be 100,000.
1,000.
And everybody doesn't get 20 because it's 5 people.
Right.
5 managers. They have to argue over how that money gets distributed.
Right.
And so this is a very contentious process, although I don't think a lot of people wouldn't say that. It's like, oh no, it's meritocracy. It should be.
Right.
It should be meritocracy. But part of this is about your manager's ability to present who you are in a convincing way. And honestly, that you've done the work. So it's the work and the presentation.
Look, I'm going to say something. First of all, I feel like you're in HR. Like, beautiful job of breaking that down, because that's exactly what it looks like. But second, the thing about that, and what I want to stress to everyone who is listening here, is that when I said, and I jumped in and I said also support, it's because you should at least have a say and know what they're going to go in there and say. Like there shouldn't be any surprises. You almost should. This is your cheerleader. Your manager is supposed to be your cheerleader. And I can't tell you how many people are like, well, my manager is my biggest distractor. Like, then you got a problem, because when it gets to calibration, they're not going to be there trying to sell
your
you.
Your manager's your agent.
Think of it that way. They really are. They really are. And then you should also have in your pocket what other people are going to go in there and also be cheerleaders for you. Right. So again, that goes back to that relationship management thing. You have to be really smart about that. I talk all the time. I have this session that I do that's called Create Your Board of Directors. And that board of directors include mentors, coaches, sponsors, there's a couple other people on there, to accountability partners. There's 7 roles that's on it. And essentially it's because of this, is that if you got to rely on just your manager tomorrow to go in and go to bat for you,
right?
Do you know what they're going to say and what they're going to do?
That's right.
Right? Because to your point, the number is the number is the number. And as much as we want to avoid that term bell curve, okay, I had somebody I once
bell curve.
It's a real thing. And just to explain, like, not everybody can get the top money. Not everybody's going to get the low money. There's going to be people. If not a bell curve, let's say it this way: a forced distribution. I'm about to say forced distribution is the terminology.
20-70-10 was what I was used to, right? So only 20% of the people can be in the highest tier, right? 70% in the middle, and 10% in the bottom. And depending on what kind of company you are in, that 10% at the bottom is forced out over the next 12 months. Right. They're managed out.
You should be managing out, to be honest. Whatever is happening in there, that's that. Because, and this is a whole nother topic, because performance improvement plans are a joke.
Well, I'm remembering how much I didn't like some of the process now. I've been away from it for a while, but I remember it.
I feel like I say that, and then everybody like cringes and like shakes over the sound of that or pip, and then they're like, don't say that.
Because the forced process forces can be very long conversations, because you always get to a place where you're supposed to be 20-70-10, but it usually starts, it felt like for me, like 35, 55 something. So then you have to talk about how you get people out of that top box.
Right. But this is what I mean about that the manager can't be the sole cheerleader for you. You have got to have other people cheerleading. And so one of the takeaways that for anybody who's listening to here is like thinking about your career as a designer. Right. Like if you're going to go in, you're going to design a room. You're not going to design a room and just put a couch in it. You're going to design all of the other components in there to make it a really beautiful space.
Absolutely.
Your career is no different than that. So even though your manager might be the couch, you need those other pieces of furniture, those other people who are going to contribute to your career being the beautiful career that you want it to be.
Right.
And like I said, no one gets anywhere alone. So you have to be purposeful about the way that you design it. So like that designer mindset is like really big. I have 4 roles that did not exist before I had them. I literally wrote the job descriptions, came up with the job title, all of the responsibilities, everything that was required of it. Right. And it was like, and I'm the person who's going to do that.
I did the same thing. So, and I had to learn the hard way. Okay. So I'm working in a company. I'm managing a team of a couple hundred people, pretty big budget, 200 people, pretty big. And I think I'm up for senior vice president promotion. The process happens. I get the phone call, and my manager tells me my new increase, tells me my bonus number, and says, all right, talk to you soon.
Right. You're like,
I'm sorry, hold up.
You're missing something.
And she said, oh, no, you didn't get the promotion this time. Latrice, I think I put my head down on my desk. Like I was at that time senior vice president, and that company meant a lot. Okay, and yeah, and so I remember a couple of days later calling 2 mentors of mine, and they both said the exact same thing. Not enough people in that room knew who you were to speak to what you do.
Right.
And I remember saying, they all know me, but they don't know you well enough to speak to what you do, the value you bring. I said, okay. So I went to New York. I remember sitting down and having lunch with one of my mentors, and they kind of gave me some game on, how to think about networking. Yes, you do share your scorecard, but here's how you may want to do it. The next year, Latrice, my performance was exactly the same. I just talked differently to people.
Right.
At that time, I was running HR service delivery. So I faced off against 7 heads of HR for different lines of business.
Okay.
I would now go to them, walk through what was happening with their organization. It was the same stuff. I just packaged it differently.
Right.
I didn't speak just corporate level. I gave them their stuff. I asked them about their needs, that we were hitting it or not. Next year, senior vice president, speed pass.
Right.
Speed pass.
Right. Not even a discussion. Just
speed
happened.
pass. Just happened.
Yeah. Okay. Now it makes sense on why you were able to break down an HR process so well. Because I was like, wait a minute, this sounded really good. Like there was nothing to add to that. So, but now I understand it. But yeah, that's what you do. That's why I said that board of directors is so important. And those relationships are so important because it's one thing for you to knock it out of the park. And let's face it. The thing, I talk a lot about performance management inside of an organization, and I think that the 5-point performance management scale kind of killed the morale around performance management. And it's something that's almost like it's very internal because we grew up with, at least in the U.S., we grew up with basically a 5-point scale for the grades, right? It's A, B, C, D, F. Right. Right? Which means meeting expectations is a C.
Right.
So when you get into the corporate workspace, you go back to that and the means.
And no one wants a C.
No one wants a C. I'm not a C.
No one wants a C.
Right. But most organizations pay 100% bonus at a meets.
Right.
So a C is
not a bad thing.
It's not a C. It's actually an A.
Right.
And actually, to get above that, you have to go above, just like you would do with extra credit. How do you get an A plus?
That's right.
Right. And then how do you get an A plus plus? Right. But you get an A plus plus because other people are talking about your impact.
That's right.
It's the same thing.
It's the same
in your
thing.
career. So those relationships, it's really important that you have multiple cheerleaders and that you arm them to cheerlead.
That's
for
so
you.
good. I love one of the quotes you make, which is or you talk about if people don't own their careers, they're leasing their time for someone else's gain.
That's right.
What made that become a staple statement of yours?
Because I think I talk to so many people. I'm listed as a career strategist. I didn't give myself that title. My clients gave me that title. And it's because in those conversations, I'd always turn from like that coaching mindset to, but how are you owning your career? Because a lot of times I'm hearing, well, they didn't do this. They didn't promote me. They didn't give me this. They. And I have to bring them back and go, but what's your part? What is your part? And we do lease our energy to organizations, and it's by design, right? They say, hey, write some goals for this year. right? And then there's like put some KPIs around that, and then we'll talk about it mid-year, and we'll talk about it at the end of the year and see how it went. Right. But development planning, most managers can't even have the conversation effectively with people. And most managers, they don't want to say it out loud, but they feel like if they develop or overdevelop their people, they tell me straight up to my face, well, what if they leave?
That is always the worry.
And I always say, well, what if you don't develop them and they stay?
Exactly. I've spent so much time talking through, particularly frontline leaders who would say you don't understand. Like if you have a call center reporting to you and their reps on the phone, the supervisors all say, you don't understand, James. You understand. Like we can't risk. And I'm like, your risk is if you don't develop them and they stay. Right. They're not as effective. They're not as efficient. They can't train the next people coming along. You don't have people who can fill spaces and needs beyond their current job. Like, so how do you so how have you broken through on getting that message across?
So a lot of the times I talk about transferable skills.
Yes.
Because, or just sitting down and doing a skill inventory for yourself. A lot of people actually don't realize how good they are or what they're doing or how that looks in a different space because they're so like in the bubble, right? So that's one of the activities that we do. When I first engage with a client is that we do a lot of intrinsic, deep like work on themselves before we even get to their LinkedIn profile.
Is that typically
it's for me or for them?
For them.
For them, it's very uncomfortable because the number one, they're like, I don't know how to talk about myself. That's the first thing that they say. And I'm like, it feels really braggy if I just sit down and do it. I said, no, we're talking about skills and competency. So I bring them back to that. Like, because I don't expect you to come back to me and be like, I'm an awesome listener. Yes, listening is a skill, right? But let's talk about some actual hardcore competencies in terms of how it shows up for this role and the next two roles you want.
Yes.
So the first thing I have to do is do that and then expand their thinking beyond the space that they're currently sitting in.
Do you get the retort sometimes? I hired you to come fix them, not work on me. Right.
Exactly. Definitely get that.
Fix them.
Fix them. It's all of them. I'm like.
Yeah. There's a great book that says, what is it? I think it's from Gallup. It's The Manager.
Yes.
Right? I think that's the name of the book. It's all about the manager. It is
because Gallup has done work over the last, I think now 40 years. And they ask this, they do the Gallup, they call it now, I think the Gallup 12. But there's these 12 significant questions that they ask, to people about happiness at work and engagement at work. And there's always, it's interesting whenever I share stats with people about engagement of like, because basically it says that 77% of employees are disengaged.
Right.
And then when they say why, they say because of the manager.
Right.
Like it's a big role.
It's a big deal.
But at the same time, a lot of people are put into manager roles because they're technically proficient, but they don't have any emotional intelligence and don't know how to lead people. And then they're just in the role and then they're like, oh, let's do this new manager training.
Right.
Like I preach all the time. No, you should be doing manager readiness training, leadership readiness training. Like training needs to come before you give a person that title.
Right.
But it doesn't really work that way in terms of the way that HR is set up. It's not set up for people to set them up for to be winners and to win and be successful. It's actually set up for you to just like go out there without a life jacket and just figure it out and see if and then we'll fix you.
Right.
So it's in fixing state, and a lot of managers think everything is about a fix.
Right.
So then when they are called to task for it, and it's like, go fix them.
Right, exactly.
Not me.
Well, I think sometimes, and some of this is corporate culture and inset behaviors where managers were almost developed in a way of almost being draconian.
Absolutely.
Separate from the team.
Absolutely.
Do not become friends with those people. You need to lead them with an iron fist.
Right.
Right. I think of Jack Welch. I think of Jack Welch's style. Remember Jack Welch's style of, every business needs to be one or two in their category or they're chopped.
Or that's it.
Right. And that kind of, to me, that kind of went through the organization in terms of just the headiness of it, but no empathy. So now you come to where we are now. And I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of like, there were the manager challenges then, but now I feel like they're very different. Even as leader myself. I feel very different in terms of how I'm challenged in
Right.
2025. What do you like? What are some of the top things that you find managers really struggling with today?
5 generations in the workplace.
5 generations in the workplace.
I mean, that's a deep thought.
Wow.
To think about that. But there is an average of at least 4, if not 5 generation in any given workplace.
That's tough.
That's really tough. And like I said, that's a talk all by itself and I think that's the toughest one because people are can easily see where the mismatches are, but it's very hard to see the synergies and capitalize off of the synergies of those 5 generations.
I have not thought about that 5 generations. It's like who's controlling the music?
Right.
Exactly right? If there's
that.
a music system, who's controlling the music?
Exactly that.
Wow, 5 generations.
Right. I think that is the number one struggle in the workplace because with every generation they bring in a different perspective and view of what work is like.
Absolutely.
Right.
And each one valid to a certain degree, right?
Each one is valid for the time that it was created, right? The approach, the silent generation, worked in order to live. Right? Like they had to work. They didn't have a choice, right? The boomers worked to live, right? And they didn't live to work, but they worked in order to live because there were so many things that they were trying to hold together economically, things like that. So there was that, and that was a very different way. And that's the last generation that spends 20, 30 years in an organization. Right. And they feel differently about it. And they look at the organization because it's a part of their lifestyle.
Absolutely. Get the gold watch, the grandfather clock, whatever.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly. But then you have the Gen Xers who came in there, and Gen Xers, we created work-life balance. I know the millennials want to take credit for that, but nope, it was there. We did that. But Gen Xers were like, we created work-life balance. We're like, we can have both of those things. We just have to figure out what they are. Right. And then we have to figure out how to not let one bleed into the other.
I mean, it's so funny you say that because I think about that. Like, I remember the first time filling out a flexible work arrangement form. Right. You had to fill out a form and say you committed to do these things if you work from home a day or two or whatever, right? Yes. And it was a test.
Oh, yeah.
It was a major test.
It was a major thing to do that, right? But that's where that came from. But if you think about that, Gen X are now your senior leaders inside of organizations. They're now the ones that are actually moving things around. Right. But they're dealing with millennials who came in and said, no, it's life-work balance. I'm going to fit you in where you can get in. Right. And that's a very different way to show up in the workplace. Correct. That's a different level of praise. That's even a different frequency of that, of praise and recognition. Like everything changed. There's nothing that stayed the same once that generation entered the workforce.
Well, it's no coincidence at the same time the gig economy was starting to grow and explode, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Optionality.
And then now you have the next generation, Gen Z, who's come in, and now they're like, look, I don't really have to swear loyalty to nobody. Like, I'm the commodity, and I can take my talents. They can LeBron anytime they want. I'll take my talents elsewhere.
I'm an influencer, dog.
Right. I don't even have to be here, right? So, like, that's a total. So think about all those different ways of showing up to work, and then manage that.
That is really interesting. I hadn't thought about 5 generations. Wow.
Yeah. That's I feel like that is a big driver to why we can't get engagement scores to move, because you have to cater. But there are synergies amongst those 5 as well.
What are the strongest synergies?
The biggest synergy is that everybody wants to live comfortably. They want to enjoy life, right? That's a connecting thread for all of them.
Even though how they might see enjoying life may be different.
It may be
still
different.
In and of itself, that theme connects people.
It still connects people.
Gotcha.
And I think organizations have opportunities. I think there's not enough value that goes into the amenities and not just your standard benefits, but those extra kind of perks that go along in it. I think rewards and recognition, it had like this flurry maybe about 10, 15 years ago where that became a really big thing. You even saw all types of tech companies getting into the rewards and recognition space. And then some reason it fizzled.
It fizzled. That was a big thing for a minute.
Right? It was like a big thing. Like I implemented at least 4
I remember the different
rewards,
companies
right?
that were starting to do that, and platforms and
Yes.
consortiums, and
Yes.
it was
And
huge for a minute.
even externally, there was even some businesses who became
Absolutely.
all about the recognition. I think of Vaudeville and
Gamification with it. I
gamification,
mean,
right?
yeah.
Like there was all these kind of like big things
You're
to keep
right.
people engaged, and then they just kind of like
You're so right.
fizzled out. And I mean, I think the pandemic has some things to do with it, but I felt the fizzle before that.
Yeah.
I
You're
started
so right.
feeling that, right?
Yeah.
So like there's just some things around like how organizations operating, people paying attention to what is and isn't happening, because if you pay attention, actually employees have a lot of power to say, hey, this is what I mean, they do an engagement survey every single year, but you know how many people are like, I ain't gonna tell, I don't want to tell the truth on an engagement survey, because what if they come after me, right? But that's just because you have your people just think negatively first. But you could also use it as an opportunity to say, this is what would keep me engaged. Yeah. And actually, I think there needs to be a revamp to engagement surveys to write them in ways that make people, give them information on how you keep them, and not so much what's making them want to leave. Yeah. And that's how engagement. Or
picking from a finite set.
A finite set,
as opposed to opening up.
Right.
That's
and
good.
there's so much opportunity that's just right in that space. I actually think that's the next wave, because engagement is at an all-time low.
That's good. What's another major synergy?
Another major synergy. Well, I mean, I think it's the bottom line, which is actually compensation. But I think it's more fair compensation. I think people want to be paid fairly. They want to be paid for the work that they have. There's no, when we talk about like benchmarking, like a compensation team say, we're going to benchmark your job and we're going to figure out like that. And again, a lot of people don't know that they can actually at any time say, hey, when was the last time you benchmarked my job?
Correct.
Right? So everybody listening, like take that as a takeaway. You can ask that question.
Amen.
When was the last time that there was a market analysis done on my role?
And you shared it with me.
Yeah, and you told me, right? And you keep in mind, they do the market analysis and then they go revised, blah, blah, blah date, right? So they have the answer to that. It is there, but most people don't know to ask. So that's a separate takeaway. But again, they want to be compensated for what they do. And then sometimes that activity itself can actually uncover that they may be out of alignment. And they may not be able to do something right at that moment, but they should be able to do something about that in the scope of their abilities. Yeah. Right. And I think a lot of the times people just need to know that something is being done.
You know what's interesting about what you're saying? Well, two things are interesting. One, do you remember when compensation was at the top of what was important, and then it started drifting down the scale? And to your point, rewards started going up, and what I'm looking for, kind of like workplace environment, culture went up, right? Now with 5 generations, to your point, it feels like compensation is going back up. But to your point, not just about money in and of itself, about fairness and comp, right? And so if you're a manager dealing with those things and you grew up with the training of one antidote has to solve all sickness, you've got to realize that, no, you need to use everything in your tool belt, because you have to treat individuals as individuals.
Yeah, you do.
Right?
There's this interesting survey, and I think Gallup also did it as well, but essentially they asked the managers, what do they feel most important to employees? And they also asked employees, what's most important to you? The interesting thing, which it always blows my mind, is that every manager is also an employee of somebody as well.
Exactly.
So I just also I find this to be the most hilarious thing, and literally they actually had some take it with the two different lens, right? And they answered differently. And no, every manager said compensation, but the reason why they say compensation is because that's a big part of their job. Like they're doing that all day, every day, right? Because everybody's like, pay me more, we do this, blah blah. Like that's their thing, hiring, firing, and stuff like that. And they're always talking comp. So I get it why that's at the top of the list. That didn't show up to number 5 on employees' list. Do you want to know what's number 1?
What's that?
Actually having the ability to grow, knowing that they have space to grow.
Got it.
That is number 1.
Got it.
That's third. Because what you're doing for me right now is not as important as where I can go tomorrow. Because that tells me I should stay because there's some potential there. So the thing, as we're talking about synergies and things like that, the opportunity, I think, of having those 5 workplaces or 5 generations in a workplace is transparency. And again, this is back to the gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Just to bring it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that we are so very protective of the compensation conversation and the performance management conversations and the development conversation. Like, it's so lock and key that people don't even know what it is anymore.
Right.
And are lost all the time.
Wow.
And that, to me, I think is the biggest, is to learn, like, pay transparency laws is a step from a systemic perspective, but people have to implement that. They got to learn how to talk better about compensation tied to performance and tied to bigger than just what you get done, but how you get it done. And that's all to do with your development of leadership competence.
That's good. That's good. Let's take a quick break, guys. Hopefully this made sense to you, learning about the 9-box, asking where you are in your comp, understanding that there's so much underneath that is happening, but you don't have to be subjected to it. You can get involved in it. Latrice, you just made a remarkable shift in your business. Tell us about it.
I did. Oh, where to start with that? So the shift was Leader Keys was, again, just leadership. In fact, it was called Leader Keys, and the tag was Unlocking Leadership Potential. And for the most part, it was for individuals, organizations, and leaders. I shifted, and it is now Leader Keys, Leadership for Black Women. Now, right?
I told Max I didn't need sound effects. I was wrong. I'm sorry, Max.
Yeah,
I got to do my own
sound effect for that one.
So I have so many questions.
I know. Well, let me tell you what. So the pivot was long overdue. I think it was something that I had been looking for. I already had programs that were very specifically for Black women. And the reason why I developed, I'm going to be really honest here, and I won't name any names or any organizations, but I coach for a lot of different organizations. I'll do like group coaching for, they basically contract me to be a coach for their programs. And a lot of those programs will either be for professionals of color. I've even had some that are for Black women specifically, but usually it's women of color as well. And I found that it was like a really big catch-all in all of those programs. The least represented were actually Black women. Even in the Black women programs that I was coaching for, I found that like all of the coaches, except for maybe me and one other, were all white. And I mean, I'm like, okay, I get it. And like, yes, anybody can coach. But if I signed up for a program that says for Black women, and then my coach turns out to be a white woman, I am going to question a little bit, like how do I connect those two thoughts, right? And again, they're programs, they're great programs, nothing against them. But I just said if I'm going to do that, I was going to do programs that were built for and by us, mostly to keep us safe.
Well, let me ask you a question that I think could be a question for many. Why does that matter?
It matters for myself. My lived journey itself is proof that it was needed, right? If I have no other proof, I have that. That having psychologically safe spaces for Black women is not only essential, but it is almost a requirement in order for us to really effectively develop.
Okay, so we have to pause for a second. Because that right there, you just said those 2 lines so eloquently. There is so much in that. So I'm going to do a couple things real quick.
Okay.
Max, I need to make an audible. We need to run past 1 o'clock because this conversation is going to go further. So please allow time. I think you're good. Lawrence is here. You got your bodyguard. You good? All right. So now let me come back in. So when you say psychological safety in that space for Black women, unpack that a little bit. What is that to the common layman? What does that mean?
So oftentimes, and I'm going to introduce a term that I think everybody has heard before. Black professionals spend a lot of time in white spaces and have to code switch to be palatable in those spaces, right? What I mean by that is that who we are with our cousins, aunties, uncles, and everything cannot be the same person that we are when we show up into the workspaces. And it's scrutinized to a point that it actually takes time and effort to think about the way we show up. Even when we embrace that identity, that it becomes a part of our identity, it still is something that we have to think about and turn off and on to some extent. It's like a radio dial, no pun intended.
Right. What's the downside of that?
The downside of that is, one, just the stress, the energy it takes to do that, right? To constantly think that. The other side, and I was just telling this joke the other day. I was like, I met a woman who I told once, I said, your code switch is too hard. Too hard. To the extent she named her other person.
She gave an identity.
Gave an identity
to the code switch.
Yes.
Wow, I've never heard that one before.
Which was wild. And the only reason why it came up was because I actually was in the middle of a coaching call with her, and with me, she was just, like.
Actually, I have heard it before. Now that you say it, I've just never connected the dots.
You never connected the dots, right? I
have heard it before.
Yes, but like we were just having our normal banter,
right?
And then an IT person came in, and then all of a sudden, she switched into a whole completely different person, but it was really like I thought it was a different person talking.
Right.
And when she came back, and then she like stopped and she breathed for a second, and I was like, that's too hard. What are you doing?
You know what I love about what you're saying? I love that you're showing the other side, because a lot of times, if I'm honest, code switching is almost seen as a necessary and a skill that will help you accelerate, right? Because a lot of times you see people talk about it, they talk about it from an ability perspective, the ability to work in those different spaces. And what I love is you're highlighting, well, yes, but to your detriment, here's what's really happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and it's everything. Look, I had a boss tell me that I needed to wear clothing with no print in order to blend in with everyone else that was on the executive floor. Said they preferred that I wore my hair straight. That was their preference.
Right.
No, sorry. They used the term flat. I didn't know what that was. They were like, I prefer your hair flat.
Right.
I guess that meant not curly, not natural. Okay, fine.
Right.
Whatever. But these are the things. And then also it's, you talk with your hands a lot. Like anybody watching know that I do talk with my hands a lot and everything. You really need to learn how to do that. Those are all kind of the things, but I can spend time. I'm not going to spend my time educating on what code switching is and how to do it or why there's a benefit and everything like that. I'm going to spend my time talking about the toll that it takes and the energy that takes in order for you to do that. And I'm saying that I'm going to create spaces where that is not necessary.
That is so good.
Period.
That is so
good.
So
that was the biggest driver for me. Not just that, but I mean, you go on social media. If I went on social media right now, or I tell you, I think when I first got here, you asked me about what has been the response. And I said, for the most part, it's been really positive that I've made this pivot or leaned further in, as I say. But the thing is, I have people slide in my DMs all day, every day.
Right.
And part of that, again, is that psychological safety.
That is remarkable. So I just want to play back what you said and make sure I get it. And then we're going to take a quick break to come across the top of the hour and come back with some more. And Max is going to try to find Gray Hair from The Truth/Emmanuel. So we can, it feels like an appropriate song right now. I'm not sure why. You'll hear it and you'll tell me. But in terms of, if what I'm hearing it correctly, these leadership programs and your observation, which I also assume didn't necessarily fluctuate by size of company or geography, anything like that. It's pretty common to see this. What I'm hearing you say is the psychological safety is so important for that exercise, because absent that and creating that space for them, they're not going to truly open up and divulge and get what you expect them to get out of the program.
Exactly. Exactly. And we'll get into that a little bit more, because the programs are designed very specifically that way, and they introduce topics that cannot be introduced if that audience look differently.
That's good. All right, so after this, we have to have this conversation, because I'm struggling. But the first decision is on the wagon or off the wagon.
Off.
I know that should be it. I'm just.
I don't know why you're thinking about this.
I don't know. You're right. All right, y'all. So if you're just joining, the voice you're hearing with me is Latrice Torres. She is a leader, a career management agent, a consultant, etc. Leader Keys is the name of her company. And we're talking about the recent shift she made in her business to go from, let's call it general market, to serving the needs of Black women specifically. And right before we went to break, we were talking about psychological safety as one of the things and the need for it that brought you into this space. So now that you're now into it, you know how you always have one thing you expect the business will be, and then you get knee deep in it.
Right.
What have you found? Has it been as expected, or have there been additional ahas, so to speak?
I actually don't know yet because I really just made the pivot. Just announced it just maybe about 2 weeks ago.
Oh,
so
it's fresh. That's right. I
fresh.
forgot that.
Yes, it's fresh. But like I said, I've already had some programs that were already facing that particular audience. So I actually don't expect. I mean, I'm excited to find out what I don't know because I'm a lifetime learner. So I will learn something. I will find some things out, and I'm excited for that journey. So,
and I know, just knowing you a short period of time, I know you're the qualitative points of the observations. I also know you're a data person.
I am. I was
Perfect.
Like, I gotta pull out my numbers.
Tell people, ground us in some of the data that also felt compelling to you.
Yeah. So there's a survey that's done by Sheryl Sandberg's company, Lean In, and essentially they talk about women in the workplace. Yeah, that's her whole thing. She wrote the book Lean In. She also came under fire for writing that book and it not feeling like it resonated with everyone. It was definitely from the perspective of white women in the workforce, and it just didn't feel complete.
Got it.
She did make that pivot, listened, and started to do the surveys, try to figure out, look at the other demographics, and kind of paint a fuller picture.
Gotcha.
So for the last, I think the first time she did this was 2018. I think was the first survey where she broke it out by demographic.
Gotcha.
To take a look at what does the workplace look like for all women, but also by their identities. So the latest data, and I brought it, I was like, I had to write this down because I don't like to quote numbers and data and not get the numbers right. But essentially, the data goes like this. So for every 100 white men that are promoted into manager level roles, 91 white women are, 89 Asian women are, 76 Latina women are. Then there's that weird bucket of women of color that could just kind of be anything, 73. Black women, 54.
Out of every 100 white men. Out of
every 100 white men.
Got it.
Just as a side note, the number 66 for Black men. So probably Leader Keys will expand to Black men eventually. But I gotta test the concept, and I'm gonna test the concept where I know it. So that's Black women,
Got
right?
it.
But again, that number still is underneath. So all of those women, even over Black men. So that's why I said it's coming. But 54. That's almost a clear 20 points below. Something's wrong with that. And there's this concept called the broken ladder that I wanted not the broken ladder, the broken rung, that I want to say it was the Wall Street Journal that actually put that out for the first time. And essentially it's like, at what point in a career journey does it become a struggle to continue to move up the ladder? And essentially it's not even frontline leadership for Black women. And that is a problem. But you see that every time. Like I challenge anybody to go and look.
Where's it at? Where's it broken?
It is broken at more of the senior specialist
So
level.
Not even at a supervisory
Not
level.
even at a frontline.
I thought you were going to say early middle management.
No.
I thought you were going to say no.
No, it's broke before that.
Wow.
It's broke. By the time you get to just like that early management level, like it's already broken. It's already at a rate that it's like, where do they start? But I mean, again, if you go around and you look around, the lower you get into the ranks, you start seeing more. But the higher in those ranks, it thins out like significantly.
Rapidly too, right? It's just
rapidly. Remember the story I told earlier about the high potential? The only Black woman on that list, Black person, period. It wasn't even about a Black baby. It was just Black person. But it was a Black woman. She was already in the C-suite. And like, that was it. So I'm like, one, like, this is a company of 11,000. How is that possible? But that's what we see. So it was also, this decision was driven by the data. And in the climate that we're in, where we're slashing even programs and everything like that, do you think, I mean, I can't even imagine where we're going to land at that point. And I know there's going to be less and less, and we're going to have to struggle more and more, even though Black women is in a demographic that is, as right now, one of the most highly educated demographics in this country. How does that work? Right? Like, we are literally looking, my digital marketer is in Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe has the same problem. They have a 89% graduation rate from their university, way above anything that we see here in the U.S. But they also have a 90% unemployment rate.
Wow.
But these are the numbers. But then when you bring it into America, we're not far off for Black women.
90% unemployment of the new graduates?
Yes.
Wow.
So you have all these smart people. That's why BPOs are popping up, particularly in some of these developed countries in Africa, because they have all of the talent, right? University is like you can go to school for a lot cheaper there than you can here, but then they have no jobs for them. So that means they have to tap into a global market.
Wow.
So again, it's not even just here in the U.S. This is across the entire Black diaspora, particularly for women.
Wow. So as you were pulling back the slingshot or the bow to get ready to launch this business, and was a couple of things. One, you knew you were going to, I mean, just by nature of the fact that now your target audience and client is shrinks, you knew your P&L, at least initially,
absolutely
would shrink, right? I'm sure you took a
hard, you said it, and I was like,
hard breath. Right. Money cometh some point. What did you think in terms of because I know that was pre, that wasn't where we are now. We're in a different place now where it feels more top of mind, in front of your face. What was your ingoing strategy in terms of how you hoped to help Black women?
So it's funny because it changed. At first, I was just like, it's just gonna be a pivot because I'm already servicing them in my business, and it's just, I'm just gonna make it official. Right. But the more I started thinking about it over these last 2 weeks, I realized I have to change the entire strategy of my business. Before, it was I did a lot of corporate contracting. So I would work with organizations, and it was easy because it's like, you want to invest in your leaders, and you'll invest in Leader Keys, and then Leader Keys will invest in you, right? Like, it was just easy to do that. But now to have to say you want to invest in your Black women in your organization, that's going to be a completely different conversation. So that means I also have to appeal directly to Black women as well. And I think it's something really important. And I actually say this to my clients, and I've always said this to them. You also have to do a certain amount of investment in yourself as well.
Correct.
So that it went from business to business to business to consumer. And now I'm going to be in that space. And that's a space that, I kind of know, but it's definitely not my strength. So it's going to be the thing that, to me, when I say what's on my development plan for this year, it's going to be that B2C, getting really good at that, and making sure that Black women understand what value I bring to them, so that they can then say, I'm willing to pay that value to invest in myself in order to be there.
And or introduce you to the company, right? Because in some cases, to the point you said earlier, and we talked about, the manager needs to use a broader toolkit. And what's going to be beneficial for one may not be the thing for another. And so when that other person comes in and says, I've identified someone who I believe is going to be instrumental in my development, I'm looking for the company to support that, because I don't want the gym, or I don't want, whatever. I need less of that. I need more of this.
Yeah. You brought up Jack Welch earlier, and one of the people I follow, and it's probably because I'm certified in it, but I do a lot of situational leadership, and this is exactly the same thing. The concepts inside of situational leadership is the same as what I'm talking about right now, and what you just mentioned is you can't apply the same type of leadership to every single person that you lead. You got to apply you got to apply the style they need in the moment for the thing they're doing at that moment, right? And so this is the same thing, and that's the appeal. And I feel like some of that is what I'm going to have to tap into in order to actually have that conversation, and then equip them to have the conversations with their organizations as well.
That's good.
So yeah, I'm going to be taking both of those approaches, but it's going to be definitely a journey. I'm going to learn, and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to figure it out, but I am very determined because I don't know, call me biased, but I actually think Black women are the future of this particular country. If not a couple other countries out there.
Yes.
But I just think we have so much power, and we've proved that in the past that I can't help but put all of my chips in on the future.
Yeah, no, that's good. You know, one of the things that jumps out to me, like you said, is being willing to invest in yourself. And to the folks listening, I would love to encourage you that while we're speaking now about Black women, that is not a concept that anyone is immune to. That the organization may not proactively supply what you need. You need to identify what you need and raise your hand.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I tell people all the time, any certification that you're looking to get, if you sit there and just wait on an organization to pay for you to get that certification, guess what happens if they do,
right?
You may not always be at that organization, but that certification is going to go with you. Right. So whether they do it or you do it, the point is the certification itself, right? It's the growth. It's your professional growth. So if they invest in it, great, brilliant, awesome, right? But when you invest in it, you're going to take that more seriously because you're like, I made this investment and I'm going to capitalize off of this investment and I'm going to turn it around with what happens in my career next.
That's good. I got a text here. I want to make sure I read and honor my commitment to bring forth what we're talking about.
Okay.
He should title his show so that we know. Oh, okay. All right. That's a different one. Thank you for that, though, who sent me the text about how I should title the shows to make sure you know what I'm talking about. It's a good point. I'll do better. Thank you. Leader keys and what you're doing now. The thing I've noticed as well is you have a focus on authentic and unapologetic presence. So much so that you've got a T-shirt about it, and it's trademarked. I think
it's trademarked. It's out on my website. I have an entire shop. You can get merch.
Yeah. So what is that about?
I think it goes back to the whole code switching thing. So when I did do DEI work, one of the things that I did is I would do these unconscious bias workshops and these microaggression workshops, and I would also do the code switching workshop. But all of them focused on the aggression of it, right? The giver of that, and no, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. But none focused on the receiving end of that, the impact of that, how to respond to those things. The audience of the actual receiver of the aggression, right? And that got me to thinking about, well, if we never really train people on how to navigate and survive and thrive past those things, then that means we're not really allowing them to actually show up authentically.
Right.
And that's where this concept came from. The unapologetic part of that piece is that, okay, once you find that authentic self, you got to own that and not ever apologize for that. So I feel like those two can't go with that. Like one can't go without the other.
That's good.
And I think as long as if Black women can embrace that, like that's step one. That's why I say I work on kind of almost like the psyche. Like we do a lot of intrinsic work first,
right?
Even though I'm not a therapist. So, and I tell them that I'm not a therapist, even though my mom's like, why are your clients always crying? But I'm like, because we having deep conversations. We're having deep conversations. But the thing is that we have to do that work because I got to strip down and I got to know who you are as a person. You got to know it, and then you got to be okay with it, and then you can't apologize.
I like
for
that.
It. So that's where that comes from.
I like that. It's almost like saying you can't be unapologetic without aim.
Right.
And you can't be authentic without commitment.
Yes. Oh, I like that. I mean, record that and send that to me because that was good.
I'm trademarking that for you.
We're gonna co-own
this
that.
Is so good. So offline, we were talking, Latrice and I. Latrice is coming back. We've got a commitment for her. She's coming back.
Yes.
But until you come back, tell people how to reach out to you.
So on all socials, you can find me Leader Keys Unlocked. So that's the end of that. But that's on all socials. I have a YouTube page that has a lot of free resources on it that people can go in. So I have videos and things like that they can download. My website is leaderkeysunlocked.com. There's resources on there. Inside of my shop, I have an entire shop. There's a whole authentic and unapologetic line, but there's also resources. You mentioned it before. I specialize in career transitions. So one of my favorite resources on there is I have a series of guides that are transitional guides. So if you're going from individual contributor to manager, from manager to director, from director to VP, from VP to executive, even executive into fractional leadership. I even have that guide as well.
Wow.
Because that's all. These are all the different transitions.
The major transitions.
Yes,
That's
that
good.
I actually talk about. So those guides are out there, and actually I have a giveaway for anybody who is listening. If you go on to the shop, there's a career action guide that actually has a lot of the concepts I talked about today. There's actually worksheets to help you work through it, starting with what's called the whole brain model that's done by Herman International. But essentially, it talks about thinking preferences and using your whole brain. And so there's some intrinsic work that it starts with, and then it starts going in. Am I in a job or a career? If I'm in a career, what's my trajectory? What I want to look. It's an entire guide. I'm giving that to you. It's normally $15. Everybody gets it free.
Nice.
Just put in the code radio25 and it'll come up zero for you.
Y'all hear that? Write that down. Radio25.
leaderkeysunlocked.com.
Listen, go get it. This has been a wonderful conversation with Latrice Torres, again, the founder of Leader Keys, and now focused on helping Black women specifically. You know someone. I was going to say if you know someone. You do know someone. There's no doubt about that, who can use her help. Point it out. Also, you may feel this inkling to support someone who can't afford it. Sometimes, we want to help people like, oh, what such could get there. Well, such and such may not have the financial means to do it right now, but you might. So go ahead and make that donation, and an investment in yourself or someone else never returns void. Until next time, Latrice, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this, and
good.
I really appreciate you having me here today. I hope everybody took some things away.
Oh, they took some things away for sure. All right, y'all. Until next time, you know what I say. Be informed, be empowered, be accountable. Much blessings, y'all.